Spec Ops: The Line is a 2012 third-person shooter video game developed by the German studio Jaeger, and it was originally intended to be some sort of a reboot of the Spec Ops series, a long-running series of video games. I personally don't believe that Spec Ops: The Line is underrated, I just believe it is overlooked. Now it has a cult following thanks partially to a lot of video essays and YouTubers, but I also believe that despite all of that, it's still kind of an overlooked game. It's been years since I've wanted to make this video, and I'm just glad I finally got the chance to talk about one of my favorite games ever made. I will try to avoid spoilers as much as possible, but I do encourage you to play the game first. As usual, I'm gonna divide this into chapters, so let's begin. War is awful. War is bad, and we know it, but we ignore it. Our society even embraces it. Armed conflict is necessary at times, but it shall be when there is no other option left. War is horrific, innocent people will die, atrocities will be committed, yet people will romanticize it or even put themselves in harm's way, not because of patriotism or for a greater cause, but for themselves, for emotion. Sometimes war is selfish, and so is Spec Ops' journey. Captain Walker wants to be a hero, wants to justify his actions instead of taking responsibility. The quote, "It takes a bad person to deny what's in front of him," is really strong when you consider the narrative and the way we experience it. To Walker, the violence is simply justified, the horror is justified because it has a greater meaning. He has to become what he so much despises in order to win. Walker kills without judgment, without fear, making use of his primordial instincts. They say it is judgment that defeats us. I think this is why Walker tries to ignore his wrongdoings as much as he can throughout the game. And if we immerse ourselves enough, so do we. The game doesn't give you a choice when it comes to brutality, manslaughter, genocide, betrayal, war crimes, because the truth is that you never had a choice. I think that's how you portray evil. Walker is evil because he's a bit more than a psychopath. He's someone who has found a way to justify what he does. He's a man who's able to justify the atrocities Delta commits. Because of him, it has a purpose. The game has a purpose. He's broken, and it takes a certain type of person to deny all evidence that says that what they're doing is simply wrong. Someone like Handsome Jack from Borderlands 2, for example. To them, it kind of makes sense. To them, the end justifies the means. To them, it is the right thing to do. And if it isn't at first instance, they'll find a way around it. Conrad is a justification for Walker, for the player, because it needs to be. It's an excuse. Sometimes people, all they need is an excuse to perform the actions they perform, an excuse to do something evil. Quote unquote, this is the only way it will work. A lot of people are not inherently bad, they need an excuse to be this way. War, or Conrad, or a villain gives it to them. That's their excuse, just like any villain in a video game or movie to an extent. No redemption, not even accepting your wrong can make amends for the things you have committed in this journey. Spec Ops obviously takes immense inspiration from the film Apocalypse Now, Full Metal Jacket, Jarhead, and the book Heart of Darkness, and it does a great job at exploring human psychology and such themes and a similar narrative, but in a video game format. I may point out that the developers credited the series Generation Kill as well when they were creating Spec Ops. There are dozens of similarities between Spec Ops and the previously mentioned media, but one I would like to point out is that Captain Walker, Lieutenant Colonel Kilgore, Captain Willard, Colonel Kurtz, Anthony Swafford, and Private Joker are essentially the same person, the same shell without a soul. There are other moments in the game that are worth looking into, like the foreshadowing moments from the very beginning of the game. Conrad's face in various billboards and Lugo hanging upside down when rappelling, or the game adding extra objectives that were not there, like keep going down. All of that, and the loading screen speaking directly to us, of course. Charging a person with murder in Dubai is essentially pointless, so is assuming responsibility or trying to preach about morality in a setting like this one. It is no man's land. It's basically everyone for themselves. That's the philosophy of the journey of the game, and it ties with the decisions the players are allowed to make throughout the game. It is about dehumanization. Who says we're judge, jury, and executioner? And I think this kind of criticism and mentality would only have worked in a video game format. An argument that all of this type of media makes is because something is horrific, because something is immoral, it doesn't mean it cannot be entertaining. A lot of war films are criticized for promoting war and even American imperialism, and indirectly, a lot of anti-war films are misunderstood by audiences. A lot of games have immoral and brutal points, actions, and they still manage to be entertaining to everyone. Spec Ops is a hard game to recommend and was a hard one to sell. You cannot recommend it without spoiling just a little bit. This is contradictory, of course, because it is better to play it without knowing much, and that's how the game was intended to be played. Obviously, that's how a lot of games are intended to be played. That's why the introduction is put together the way it is. It's ironic, it subverts our expectations. Cheesy comedy, American white man directly out of movies, a generic brown looking war zone, and if someone speaks in a different language, they're just probably trying to kill you. But I think it was hard to sell exactly because of that. How do you market this? People can come in knowing nothing, and being exposed to that, essentially the introduction, can be unfulfilling. It takes a little bit of time to take off, but today, thanks to the internet, many people will come into this game knowing that it's a hell of a journey and that atrocities will be committed. And back then, when we had the video game shooter epidemic, I'm not surprised it didn't sell. And who would have thought that a game that will be released 8 years later will attempt to follow a similar route, only a bit differently. Another point is the themes it covers. It's hard to recommend or sell a game that is going to make you feel bad for forcing you to assume the role of a psycho killer and his death squad on their journey towards hell as they commit atrocities along the way. That's why I also think it is an overlooked game. It has its community and it has gained a status of being a disturbing and extremely good game with an excellent narrative, but I rarely even hear someone criticizing the mediocre shooting mechanics only in analysis videos because everyone knows the narrative is a priority here. I still think there's a lot of people who have simply ignored it because it is hard to play it nowadays without spoiling yourself about the white phosphorus scene, for example, about the ending, or maybe they just don't like the gameplay. And it is something I realized when I read and watched reviews, essays, opinions, and videos in general about The Last of Us 2, that a lot of people haven't even played Spec Ops in the first place. Apocalypse Now plays a similar trick. We, as the audience, tend to show empathy for the protagonist. Unconsciously, they are our protagonists, our boat in the narrative journey, so we find a justification no matter how small it may be. Characters in this type of media are not good people. Arguably, they are victims themselves, but they are the ones that take us through the experience. In this case, since Spec Ops is a video game, we actually play as Walker. We spend 12 or so hours with him and his squad, and we unconsciously have some empathy for them because we have control over his character. This is emphasized at the beginning of the game when the title screen says starting and then our name. It is our journey too. So that's why I think Spec Ops The Line is an overlooked masterpiece. I understand the game has many flaws, every game has flaws, and I believe Spec Ops' greatest flaw is the gameplay mechanics. But even taking that into consideration, I still believe this game is a masterpiece. It is just great. It is one of my favorite games ever, and I am super glad to finally have the chance to talk about it. I've postponed this script for so many years. This is a video that I intended to make years ago. Also, one thing I decided not to include in the main script, but I think it's worth pointing out, is that I do believe that Spec Ops' journey needed a male protagonist, and so did all of the other media. In my personal opinion, the story of Spec Ops: The Line and the other media could not have been told with either a female protagonist or a non-binary protagonist, for example. As much as I crave for representation in media, I do believe that all of these things I've mentioned benefit from having a male protagonist. Machismo as well as gender roles enhance the criticism all of this media is trying to make, especially Spec Ops: The Line, and especially when in most of our video games the protagonist is a generic white cisgender man. On the other hand, that's why I also believe that The Last of Us 2 story could not have been told with a different protagonist. So that is all I wanted to say regarding this game and all of the media that surrounds it. Thank you so much for watching, it means a lot, and I would love if you consider subscribing or leaving a like. Feel free to check out my other videos. Consider playing Spec Ops: The Line for yourself if you haven't played it before. And if you have and you like it, consider watching Apocalypse Now or any of the other things I've mentioned in this video. Stay safe, wear a mask, put on hand sanitizer, and until the next video.